What do you think is the most valuable thing for a person? Life, health, the future? None of these things. The most valuable thing for a person is their consciousness. Would a person value life or health if they were in a coma or had serious brain damage? In such situations, people wouldn't even understand the essence of those values. They mean nothing to them. Life and health gain value only when consciousness arises. But what is this consciousness? Where does it come from? This will be the topic of this video. And I know I've dared to touch the sacred. Each of us tends to deify ourselves, or rather our self-consciousness, and the loss of this divinity can be shocking. I will tell you a story about how the human spirit soared above the explanation of the idea of self-consciousness and the crazy hypotheses that arose to explain this phenomenon. Let's start with ancient Greece. Plato believed that a person consists of two entities, the body and the soul. In his work Phaedo, he says, "A pure soul, separated from the body, is in a blissful state, eternally contemplating the truth. The soul is immaterial and immortal, while the body is material and temporary." Plato argued that true knowledge and consciousness are connected with the world of ideas, or world of forms, where ideal, eternal, and unchanging entities exist, which are the true realities. The physical world, on the other hand, is only a shadow or reflection of these ideas. But let's return to consciousness. According to our feelings, it is something that is in our head and creates the world. Therefore, Aristotle did not accept the ideas of Platonic dualism and proposed the concept of hylomorphism, where all physical objects consist of matter, hyl, and form, morphe. The soul is the form of the body and does not exist separately from it. He believed that the soul is entelechy, that is, the actualization of the potential of a living organism. The soul is not a substance separate from the body, but it determines the essence and functions of the living organism. There is nothing strange about such views. Our self constantly creates a model of the world in our head. Yes, we see not the real world, but only its phantom created by our soul, as Aristotle believed. Here's an example. Close your eyes, relax, and listen to these sounds. You almost saw the sea, the beach, and the waves rolling onto the shore. Perhaps you felt the warmth of the sun and the touch of a pleasant breeze wrapping around your body. And this is just thanks to one sound. The brain created a reality for you, and it became truly real for you. What if you add visual sensations? It can create extraordinary feelings of reality for us. The industry has long understood this and created various devices for us. For example, the popular 3D IMAX cinemas. Viewers literally immerse themselves in the events happening on the screen. But for many years, I waited for an affordable and high-quality solution for the home. Many virtual reality glasses appeared, although their quality was mediocre. And finally, in 2023, perfect glasses came out. The Meta company released its version of the virtual world at the price of an average smartphone. They are called Meta Quest 3. If you want extraordinary sensations, I'll leave a link to the best price offer in the first pinned comment. This is not just some advertisement, it's a recommendation from the heart. It's simply a crime not to treat yourself and your family for such a price. And don't forget to mention us with Cat Martin kindly when your guests scream with delight while crossing a virtual plank attached to the edge of a high-rise building or racing on a virtual ride. Aristotle interestingly divided the soul into three levels according to the types of living organisms. Vegetative soul, plants. It is responsible for growth, nutrition, and reproduction. Sensitive soul, animals. It includes the functions of the vegetative soul as well as the ability to perceive and move. Rational soul, humans. It includes the functions of the vegetative and sensitive souls as well as the ability to think and rational cognition. In the opinion of Cat Martin, Aristotle made a mistake. The rational soul is just in animals, because how can you explain rationality in what humans do to each other and to our planet? It's completely incomprehensible. And I can agree with Cat Martin here. So now we will conduct a small experiment. I won't invent the wheel, but we'll take an example from literature. For example, imagine a red monkey. "You are a fat macaque yourself," Cat Martin immediately exclaimed, obviously not understanding what it was about. Okay, we won't upset the representative of the leading civilization. Look at this cute cat. Now pause the video and try not to think for a whole minute about this cute creature lapping milk, holding a 5-liter can of milk in its paws. You need to not think about this for a minute. Oh my! How could you do that? I told you not to think or imagine these absurd things, and you not only imagined it, but also added details. And it's better if you don't tell Martin about these details, for the sake of the existence of slippers on Earth. And Aristotle still talked about human rationality. But where would it come from? Rational cats would never think about such nonsense. Approximately the same thought was held by Thomas Aquinas, a prominent Christian theologian and philosopher of the Middle Ages. His works, particularly Summa Theologia, became the basis for scholastic theology. Thomas believed that consciousness and the soul have divine origins. He considered the soul to be the form of the body that determines its essence, similar to Aristotle, but with a Christian emphasis on its immortality and divinity. According to Aquinas, consciousness includes intellect, intellectus, and will, voluntas. The intellect is responsible for knowing the truth, and the will for striving for good. Both of these abilities are considered God's gifts that distinguish humans from animals. Oh, if only you had a good cat, Thomas, I thought. But Thomas had Christian faith. Christian orientation toward God and the soul did not allow various theories to develop, so new options appeared only during the Renaissance. During that period, there was a significant shift in philosophical thinking. Instead of theocentrism, where God was the center of all being and knowledge, anthropocentrism came to the fore, where humans and their experience became the basis of understanding the world. This also influenced the development of understanding consciousness. In his famous speech, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, an Italian philosopher and scholar, emphasized the uniqueness and potential of humans. "Are you sure about humans?" asked Cat Martin. "Yes, Martin, for sure." The work was called Oration on the Dignity of Man. "Incurable," muttered Martin, and went to finish his can of milk, whistling his own tune, Fat Macaques. And while the cat is not listening, I'll continue. Giovanni argued that humans occupy a special place in the universe because they have free will and the ability to improve themselves. They can achieve divine wisdom and approach God through the development of their intellectual and spiritual abilities. This optimism about human nature was a distinctive feature of Renaissance humanism. Humans can rise to the level of angels or fall to the level of animals, depending on their choices and actions, Pico wrote in his speech. Here it may seem that we have deviated from the topic of consciousness, but this is not so. Because in any works or stories, a person is consciousness. It's not hands, legs, or brain. It's not even brainless two-legged walking stick, as Cat Martin believes, but consciousness itself. Therefore, exploring consciousness can be done by exploring humans. Leonardo da Vinci, a medieval scientist, engineer, and artist, came to the same conclusion, the creator of the famous painting Vitruvian Cat. Leonardo da Vinci studied consciousness through the lens of scientific observations and experiments. His anatomical studies of the brain and nervous system laid the foundation for the further development of neuroscience. Leonardo created detailed anatomical drawings of the brain, skull, nerves, and blood vessels. His studies included dissections of human bodies, which allowed him to make numerous discoveries about the structure of the brain and nervous system. Leonardo was also interested in the functions of different parts of the brain. He studied how the brain controls movements, sensations, and emotions, which was a pioneering approach for his time. This laid the foundation for the further development of neuroscience and the understanding of consciousness. Interestingly, Leonardo tried to explain the work of the brain and nervous system using hydraulic and mechanical processes. "What's so strange about that?" Cat Martin philosophically murmured, slyly squinting. "Any respectable cat understands that your mind is made of shit and sticks." After Leonardo, the world stubbornly continued to lean towards rationalism. René Descartes is considered one of the most famous representatives of rationalism. He argued that consciousness is the foundation of human existence and is known for his phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Descartes believed that consciousness is independent of the body and that knowledge can be obtained through reason without the need for sensory experience. Well, at this point, we can only marvel at Descartes' foresight. In 2013, the Argus 2 device was approved for use, designed for blind patients. The device consisted of a camera mounted on glasses that transmitted images to electrodes implanted in the retina of the eye. The Argus 2 version had only 60 electrodes, allowing patients to recognize light, darkness, or elementary movement. Other developments include a device created by engineers from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and the University of California at Berkeley. This device, known as the electrochemical eye, has a structure resembling the human eye and uses nanowires to improve image quality. Despite promising results, scientists face the challenge of connecting this device to the brain or optic nerve, and this will undoubtedly be realized soon, as will other projects that do not use natural human sensors. So if desired, Descartes can be considered a prophet of cyberpunk. John Locke, a prominent English philosopher and thinker, on the contrary, was one of the leading representatives of empiricism. Locke believed that consciousness is formed through experience. He argued that a person is born as a tabula rasa, or clean slate, and all knowledge is obtained through sensory experience and reflection. Locke believed that consciousness is a product of interaction with the external world. "How?" squinted Cat Martin. "Clean slate? I confirm, absolutely clean and 100% oak," summarized the cat with satisfaction. And I'm not as cynical as my cat and need to discuss this idea in more detail. Let's imagine a brain that was born without the ability to receive sensory information. That is, without hearing, sight, or tactile sensations. It seems such a brain could not create anything because it would have no information about what can be created at all. That is, it would not create its virtual universe. But is this really so? Consider a small example from the recent past. At the beginning of the neural network boom, programmers often created neural networks that controlled old console games to study the properties of neural networks. This happened as follows. A neural network was built from rows of identical neurons, and programmers, feeding the network data about the state of the game object, tried to achieve some game result through learning. One such game was Cart Pole. In this game, there was a cart with a pole vertically attached through a movable hinge. The game also simulated gravity, and the pole tried to fall. The player's goal was to keep the pole in a vertical state for as long as possible by moving the cart left or right. Data about the state of the pole and the cart were fed into the neural network every moment, and it had to learn to control the cart, which the neural network successfully did. But Google offered its version of the neural network. It was called WAN. The idea was not to blindly take some number of rows of neurons, but to try to create a neural structure that could play the game without learning. That is, to create a ready-to-play neural network. And in training, the structure of the neural network itself was created. This process is much more similar to the processes in our heads. After successfully creating such a neural network, it turned out that a few neurons, appropriately connected, were enough to control the game, not rows of dozens of neurons as in the classic version. Moreover, such a structure did not require any learning for its operation. It worked immediately. Can you imagine? In our brain, too, there are many such structures responsible for basic reflexes, breathing, or heartbeat. In addition, there are structures that determine our future behavior or passions. And who can confidently say that there are no structures that determine our consciousness? Perhaps such an isolated brain, as in the previous example, would create some incomprehensible amorphous worlds for itself, which we can only dream of in the deepest dreams. Meanwhile, the understanding of consciousness more and more shifted from philosophical to rational. Scottish philosopher David Hume also belonged to the tradition of empiricism. He was skeptical about the possibility of absolute knowledge and emphasized that the mind is a collection of impressions and ideas we acquire through experience. Hume believed that our understanding of reality is limited by our perceptions and that we cannot be sure of the existence of an objective reality beyond our impressions. You see, what an interesting symbiosis of rationalist and philosophical approaches. I always say that people and human consciousness seem to be specially created for solipsism. Solipsism is a philosophical doctrine according to which the only thing that can be reliably known is the existence of one's own consciousness. Well, you conscious ones, murmured Martin skeptically. Well, the cat knows what he's murmuring about. When he's hungry, he's the most affectionate creature in the universe, but once he's fed, I disappear from his feline consciousness, and he stops noticing my mortal existence in this world. So the hypothesis has been repeatedly tested by the cat Martin. Nevertheless, the rationalization of everything has led to a similar view of man and consciousness. In the 19th, 20th centuries, the development of experimental psychology and psychoanalysis began. Wilhelm Wundt was the founder of experimental psychology. In 1879, he opened the first psychology laboratory in Leipzig, Germany. Wundt sought to study consciousness through scientific methods, using experiments to measure reactions and conscious processes. He developed methods of introspection, where subjects described their internal experiences in response to stimuli. The scientist studied the work of associations, emotions, and the sense of time. Sigmund Freud, an Austrian neurologist, significantly influenced the understanding of consciousness through the development of psychoanalysis. Freud's views on consciousness were somewhat narrow but poetically beautiful. He believed that human behavior is driven by two main instincts, the life instinct, eros, and the death instinct, thanatos. Eros encompasses the sexual drive and the desire for survival, reproduction, and pleasure, while thanatos represents the unconscious desire for death, which can manifest as aggression or self-destructive behavior. Regarding consciousness, Freud believed that it consists of three parts: the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. He developed methods for studying unconscious processes, such as dream analysis and associative tests, and argued that many of our mental problems arise from conflicts between these parts of consciousness. Here we have reached the most interesting part: modern views on consciousness. But before continuing, I would like to announce that all those who wish can treat me to coffee to support my spirit, and the cat Martin, with a bowl of food to support his healthy cynicism, which we love so much. The link to a cup of coffee is in the description under the video. For the coffee, you can suggest the topic of the next story, which our motley duo will happily create for you. So back to the present. Do you think it's time for boring, rationalistic, dull hypotheses that no one cares about? You're wrong. The madhouse is just opening its doors. We live in a technogenic, science-driven world, and so we come to a very painful topic for people: free will. Official science hints that consciousness is created by our brain, and that consciousness is simply the result of neuron activity. Accordingly, our thoughts, decisions, and feelings are just electrical discharges in the brain. This means that we are not the masters of our entire I, but damned physics is. This thought is unbearable not only for ordinary people, but also for physicists themselves. At these words, Martin began to chew on a sausage with an especially sinister crunch. Of course, some interest in this situation may be added by Nick Bostrom's many-world interpretation. I have already talked about it in the video, the link to which you see at the top of the screen. If Nick's hypothesis is correct, the universe goes through all possible states, so the fatalism inherent in the scientific approach to consciousness becomes less painful. Nevertheless, scientists propose other hypotheses. Roger Penrose is a British mathematician, physicist, and cosmologist, known for his contributions to the theory of relativity, quantum gravity, and the study of consciousness. One of the most influential scientists of our time. By the way, at the moment, Roger is 92 years old, and he is still active in the scientific community. So, Penrose proposed the idea that consciousness cannot be explained by the traditional computational model of the brain, and that quantum effects may play a key role in consciousness. Together with Stuart Hameroff, he developed the OR hypothesis. I will tell you more about it. Penrose believes that consciousness arises from quantum processes in microtubules, which are structural elements of brain cells. These processes are associated with the gravitational collapse of quantum states, leading to the reduction or selection of one state from many possible ones. Thus, consciousness is the result of the complex interaction of quantum mechanics and biological processes in the brain. I am not surprised that this hypothesis has many critics. It is true madness. If you go further, biological processes of the organism can control quantum ones, and this is already the tail wagging the dog. Isn't that so? Dogs are controlled by their tails, and what controls you when you stare at girls? Commented the cat Martin, somewhat feministly. Penrose's hypothesis still has many inconsistencies, but is it the first time that an initially funny hypothesis eventually becomes a confirmed theory? A similar explanation is the integrated information hypothesis. This is another explanation of how consciousness arises. The hypothesis was proposed by the Italian scientist Giulio Tononi in 2004. Its main idea is that consciousness arises when information in the brain is integrated, that is, combined into a whole. Imagine that the brain is a complex system with many interconnected parts. When these parts work together and exchange information, a conscious experience arises. The hypothesis uses the concept of integrated information, called phi, to measure the level of consciousness. A higher level of phi means a greater degree of consciousness. I must admit that I like this hypothesis. Recent scientific studies show the presence of self-awareness not only in more developed mammals but also, for example, in mice. Therefore, to say that consciousness is inherent only in humans is wrong. I am generally against sharp boundaries in science. For example, the division into people and animals or the separation of quantum and physical laws. All those lines or borders that were drawn to separate these things are being erased over time. Yes, the cat Martin supported me. Of course, there are no boundaries, he continued. For example, you don't seem to be able to fly, but when you see me getting ready to mark your slippers, you fly to them like a hawk to a partridge, the cat sarcastically finished. Excellent example, I replied confusedly. But I'll give a slightly different example with the behavior of an ordinary fly. Try leaving meat covered with a bowl by an open window on a summer day. A giant fly will quickly come, smelling the meat and wanting to lay its eggs on it. Look at how it will try to get under the bowl. It will practically lift it. Can this really be called reflexes? In humans, reflexes are responsible for the simplest actions, such as salivating at the sight of a lemon or blinking when something gets in the eye. And this is in us, creatures with a kilogram of brain matter in the head. But the fly explores the plate, climbs in different directions, looking for holes. Can this be explained simply by reflexes? But this question is more rhetorical. Don't think that I am afraid of a global fly conspiracy. I am quite satisfied with knowing about the global cat conspiracy led by Martin. But let's get back to people. The phi hypothesis tries to explain why we experience the world as we do, and how different states of consciousness can arise in different situations, such as during sleep or coma. The theory of integrated information can also help in creating artificial intelligence that may have consciousness and in understanding how the brain works. Now about artificial intelligence. Alan Turing was an outstanding British mathematician and logician. He created a remarkable computational machine, but more about it another time. In addition, Turing is known for his test. The Turing test is a conceptual experiment he proposed in 1950 to determine if a machine can think like a human. The test process looks like this. In one room, there is a person, whom we will call the judge. In another room, there can be either another person or a computer. The judge communicates with the one in the second room through text messages, but he does not know who exactly he is communicating with, a person or a computer. If the judge in the process of communication cannot accurately determine whether he is talking to a person or a computer, then the computer is considered to have passed the test. Thus, the Turing test does not so much check whether the machine really thinks, but rather whether it can imitate human conversation so well that a person cannot distinguish it from another person. This is one of the first and most well-known methods of evaluating artificial intelligence. I won't say that I am a fan of such a test, but I must inform you that modern large language models successfully pass such a test. Unlike you, the cat Martin joked unfunny and insultingly. Well, the cat Martin is busy calling my persona names, and science is still working on explanations of the phenomenon of consciousness. And what about philosophy? After all, philosophical research does not require either experiments or adherence to other concepts. But, as it turned out, things are even worse here. David Chalmers well reproduced the situation with scientific explanations of consciousness. David Chalmers is an Australian philosopher who also studies consciousness. Chalmers talks about the fact that there are easy and hard problems of consciousness. Easy problems are those that we can solve by understanding how the brain works. For example, how we perceive colors or recognize sounds. They are considered easy because the answers to these questions can be found through science. The hard problem is the question of how and why consciousness arises. That is, how physical processes in the brain create subjective experiences, such as the feeling of pain or taste. The hard problem is that even if we know everything about the brain, we still cannot explain why these processes are accompanied by conscious sensations. This question remains open, and Chalmers believes that for its solution, perhaps a new approach or even a new science is needed. Also, American philosopher Thomas Nagel told us about his vision of the problems of studying consciousness. He wrote a famous article, "What is it like to be a bat?" where he discusses the problem of subjective experience. Nagel wants to show that there are aspects of consciousness that are difficult or impossible to understand from an objective point of view. He uses the example of a bat, as these animals perceive the world very differently from humans, thanks to echolocation. Even if we know everything about the physiology of the bat and its brain, we cannot understand what it is like to be a bat because we cannot feel its subjective experience. Here is a quote. "It is meaningless to demand an explanation from the objective that describes inner subjectivity. We can imagine what it is like to be a bat, but we will never truly understand it because we are not bats." And this applies not only to bats, but also to humans. There is an interesting thought experiment by the Australian philosopher Frank Jackson. Jackson describes a scientist named Mary, who lives in a black and white room and has never seen colors. She knows everything there is to know about the physiology and neurobiology of color perception, but only in black and white terms. One day, Mary leaves the room and sees colors for the first time. The question is, does Mary learn something new when she sees colors, or does her knowledge remain the same? At this point, I also have a similar experiment. I accidentally ate the last sausage for the first time, and the shops are already closed. I wonder if the cat Martin will move to the next level of contempt for me upon learning about this. These experiments highlight the idea that there are aspects of conscious experience, qualia, that cannot be fully understood through physical or objective knowledge alone. When Mary sees colors for the first time, she gains new knowledge about what these colors look like, even though she already knew everything about their physiology. This supports the idea that subjective experience cannot be fully described in objective scientific terms. Just as Nagel says, we will never understand what it is like to be a bat. And you will never know what it is like to walk in clean slippers, hissed Martin, remembering the sausage. Well, I will have to come to terms with this, and you will never know what it is like to come to terms with such facts. Or will you? Let's ask the philosophers. A whole epic battle is going on between some groups of philosophers. It is a battle between Epiphenomenalism and Interactionism. And you still complain that I use artificial intelligence to voice scripts. Neither I nor the cat Martin would ever pronounce these terms in our lives. More precisely, I would not pronounce them, and the cat Martin would not even try to pronounce them. So supporters of epiphenomenalism argue that consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity. According to their views, conscious sensations and thoughts arise due to physical processes in the brain, but they themselves do not have a real impact on these processes. It's like a shadow. It exists thanks to the object casting it, but it does not affect the object itself. Meanwhile, adherents of interactionism argue that consciousness has independent existence and can influence the physical world. Supporters of this theory believe that conscious decisions and desires can cause changes in brain activity and thus influence our behavior and actions. This is such a unity and struggle of opposites. But the most absurd concept is panpsychism. This is a philosophical hypothesis that consciousness is a fundamental and universal property of everything that exists. This means that every object in the universe, even the smallest particle of matter, has a conscious aspect. Panpsychism does not necessarily imply that all objects have developed consciousness like humans, but assumes that they have some basic form of experience or conscious state. The cat Martin chuckled and said, "A silly hypothesis. I don't know about consciousness, but everyone knows that you definitely don't have brains." "Oh, that sarcastic creature. Oh, someday I will get my revenge. It is such a pity that cats do not wear slippers. My revenge would be terrible and inevitable, or maybe they do wear them. Tomorrow I will look for and buy Martin the slippers of the apocalypse." Well, what can I say? You see for yourself what is happening in scientific and philosophical circles. And I have one more additional question. In none of the hypotheses was there anything said about intelligence or consciousness that exceeds human. It is clear that people are fixated on themselves, but I have already said that I do not like limitations in science. Therefore, still, does everyone really believe that in the infinite universe, there will not be beings with more developed consciousness and intellect, as well as such facets of consciousness that we cannot even imagine? However, soon artificial superintelligence, which humanity intends to create in the coming decades, will be able to inform us about this. I still hope that programmers will focus on creating precisely superintelligence and will not even try to emulate consciousness, because there is no guarantee that a superintelligence that also develops consciousness will not immediately wipe us off the face of the earth to protect itself. But if that happens, it will become clear that Daniel Dennett best understood the nature of consciousness. Daniel Dennett is an American philosopher who, again, studies consciousness. He believes that consciousness is not some separate thing or place in the brain where everything comes together. Instead, it arises from many processes in the brain that work simultaneously. According to his hypothesis, there is no single center of consciousness. Dennett also says that our understanding of consciousness as something separate and special is an illusion. He uses scientific research of the brain to explain how different processes create what we perceive as consciousness. And it is most likely that realist Daniel Dennett was right. "You haven't even dealt with cat consciousness yet," Martin laughed ominously, and I woke up. Martin, in his basket, was peacefully cosplaying a chaffinch on eggs. Everything was calm, and there was a rescue pack of sausages in the fridge. But will everything stay the same when people finally learn the truth about their consciousness? Who knows, except for Martin. Consciously like, smack, ring the YouTube bell, subscribe to the channel, come for coffee. While humanity doesn't know about consciousness and there are sausages in the fridge, life goes on.